Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The BC Legislature is back in session today, and the makeup looks a little different as the BC Conservatives take official status. What impact will the party have on debate, and what issues do you want politicians to focus on? And we'll get reaction from Surrey business to the latest in the tensions between Canada and India. Plus, we'll talk about ghosting. No, not the Halloween costume kind, but the not calling or not texting kind, even scarier. Let us know, have you been ghosted? I'm Michelle Eliot. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page.
Make way for Mr. Speaker.
That was the sound in Victoria just after 10 o'clock this morning as the fall session of the BC Legislature got underway. This time, it's with 4 official parties in the chamber. The BC Conservatives now have official party status, and they're already promising to shake things up in Victoria. Well, from housing to emergency management, we want to hear what the top issues are for you. You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. But first, on a related story, BC Conservative Party leader is already making waves for a social media post on September 30th, which is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. John Rustad's tweet seemingly likened the teaching of sexuality and gender in classrooms, the SOGI curriculum, to residential schools. Now, this comes after groups across Canada protested the teaching of SOGI in schools. Well, for more on this, we're joined by Pixie Wells, president of the Fraser Valley Métis Association. Hello, good afternoon.
Hey, swell, Tansei, everybody. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much for joining us, Pixie. Why do you think it's important that we talk about this post?
Well, I think it's important to understand the identities and what they're actually talking about. SOGI is a curriculum, not residential school.
So what you're saying there is there a comparison? He was seemingly making that comparison. You're saying that's not justified.
I don't believe that, in my opinion, I don't believe it's justified. I sit on many councils. I'm also the president of the Fraser Valley Métis Association. I also sit as the chair for the 2S LGBTQIA+ national committee that is sponsored by the Women of Our Nation, LFMO. And we are in the process right now of reclaiming our Two-Spirit identity from an Indigenous perspective. And colonialization took a lot of that away in residential schools. So I think there needs to be some clarification and understanding of the difference between two-spirited people and Indigenous understandings, and also SOGI in a curriculum in an educational field.
And when it comes to John Rustad's tweet, it read in part, "Today we remember what happens when the Canadian government thinks it's better at raising children than parents." Can you tell me what went through your mind when you first heard about it?
Well, when I first heard about that, first of all, I thought it was a very political move to make on such a day, as we're supposed to be reflecting on truth and reconciliation and the atrocities that happen during the residential institutions. So for me, it was quite alarming, and to have somebody of a political stature use that as a reference into today's ideologies of things that people may or may not understand and may be protesting against, I think was, for me, a very public, but he used a political forum to use and say something that is very personal to him. Obviously, he doesn't follow or doesn't understand the SOGI curriculum, or isn't feeling that that's an important thing to be educating our children on in the educational system. And some of the times I think, I also sit on the Indigenous Education Council, and we need to remind ourselves that it's an educational tool. It's a tool in a toolbox for teachers to utilize when and if they need or feel that their is the need to do so. Not all two-spirited people and LGBTQIA plus people are safe in the comforts of their own home. So to be able to have places like schools where people can feel safe and actually see themselves, because I remember those days when I was young and there was no SOGI, there was no nothing in schools, and trying to identify as not being male, not being female, and trying to understand those nuances as a child was very difficult. And it wasn't something that was spoken about back then. At least children have the opportunity to find somebody to have those conversations with, if those conversations are challenging at home or challenging anywhere else in the world for them. They need to feel like there's a place for them to go. We are all human people. And again, I think a lot of this is being taken out of context. A lot of people are utilizing it as a sexual thing and not as an educational tool. And that's just my perspective. However, from the Indigenous perspective, I think he crossed the line. And as a Métis citizen and as a two-spirit person, I think he owes the nations an apology, all nations across this country.
You would like to hear an apology from John Rustad?
Absolutely.
You've touched on this already. Journalists asked him to clarify his tweet, and he said he wasn't trying to compare students today to what Indigenous children went through at residential schools. He said he was talking about what parents went through, including what he said was having their rights taken away is not right. How far does that go? Does that clarify anything for you?
I don't think that actually clarifies anything. I think that's sort of a backpedal and an opportunity to utilize something and use a parental right as a tool. Don't get me wrong, parents have rights over their children and as a human. But again, at the same time, I think he used that as a tool. And again, schools today weren't designed like residential institutions. And I think that's an understanding that he needs to understand, that those were not schools, those were institutions where it wasn't an education that you were receiving. It was a change to your whole identity and understanding of who you are, not trying to find yourself or come into yourself or have questions about who you might be. Those were not answered. Today, we have the opportunity to allow our children, from my perspective, to have the opportunity to ask questions that may be uncomfortable for their parents to hear or know, or even understand that a child may be feeling different inside. So I think I say hi to teachers. I say hi to the people who are brave enough and strong enough to use this as a tool to allow our children to educate themselves, and whether that be in many different facets. But this is a particular facet that I know something about personally and have lived with all of my life as a child, always feeling like I was in the wrong body.
Pixie, it's very good to hear from you today. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate hearing your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Have a great day yourself. Pixie Wells is the president of the Fraser Valley Métis Association. It's now 12:14, 1:14 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC. We're on radio and live streaming as well. Now, issues on the table this session of the legislature include things like housing reform and emergency management. We want to hear from you on this. What issues do you want BC politicians to focus on in this session? What impact could the official status of the BC Conservatives have on debate and on the next election? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone as well. By email, we're bctoday@cbc.ca. And joining us to take your calls is Stuart Prest, a lecturer in political science at UBC. Stuart, good afternoon. Stuart, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, you've heard the reaction there from Pixie Wells to the news that was made over the weekend on National Day for Truth and Reconciliation by John Rustad. What do you take from that story, and how do you expect the dynamic in Victoria to change then with the addition of the BC Conservatives?
Well, I think it gives us a bit of taste of what's to come in the next year with the BC Conservatives enjoying official party status now. They're going to have a bigger platform, a louder megaphone to highlight the issues that that party is organizing itself around, and those seem to be above all social issues. These kinds of cultural touchstones regarding policies to support gender inclusive classrooms or education around sexual issues in classrooms. Those are the issues that that party wants to focus on, and so we're just going to have that as part of the conversation going forward.
And so, what reaction do you think other parties will have to the presence of the BC Conservatives as official party? How will Kevin Falcon and BC United need to perhaps adapt to that right of center vote perhaps being split?
It's a good question. I think it's in some sense the defining question for this upcoming session, because Mr. Falcon is in a difficult spot with the rise of the BC Conservatives. He's for BC United to succeed, they really need to be able to pull the vast majority of those right of center voters together, but also pick up votes in the more centrist parts of the province, and so they need to be able to at once speak to the minority of the province that those sort of cultural issues really resonate with, but at the same time find ways to communicate with the more centrist or even slightly left of center British Columbians who are not really focused on those issues, but rather issues of affordability, issues of access to healthcare, and so on. And those are two very different conversations, and it's difficult to have them both at the same time. Like the cultural messages tend to overwhelm, and they tend to turn off as many voters more than are enamored with those kinds of messages.
Okay, well, let's hear from a voter right now. Then we are asking our audience to weigh in. You can give us a call. Let us know what are the issues that you would like BC politicians to focus on in this sitting of the legislature, and what impact do you think the BC Conservatives will have on the debate and on the next election next year. You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. By email, we're bctoday@cbc.ca. And Val is calling us. Let's go east to Trail. Hi, Val.
Hi there.
Thanks very much for calling in. What do you want politicians to focus on?
Old growth forest, preserving the old growth ancient ecosystems, and that encompasses a huge amount of topics such as carbon sequestration and Indigenous rights, and bringing Indigenous bands out of poverty so they aren't forced to agree to logging the shreds of old growth that are remaining. And endangered species, salmon spawning. We have so little left, and the cutting is still going on. And so we should be asking the government to adhere to the recommendations of the Strategic Old Growth Committee, who put forth 14 recommendations, and the government that was 2+ years ago, and the government hasn't adhered to one fully yet.
In terms of deferrals, you don't think enough has been done?
Deferrals are just deferrals. And, the bands, if they're in poverty, they are going to be forced to, sell their birthright and a treasure. And they should be helped. So that they aren't driven to that extreme.
Val, thank you very much for the call. And Val referred there in that call to that strategic review of the Old Growth Committee. This was in 2019 when the province appointed a panel as part of an old growth strategic review. And the intent of it was to provide more clarity about old growth management. And as she said, 14 recommendations there. Stuart Prest, political scientist, lecturer in political science at UBC. What does this issue mean for the NDP? We hear there from someone who says the deferrals are still just deferrals.
I think it's an issue where the NDP is trying to show that they have a plan of management, that they're trying to balance out these competing interests to provide opportunities where Indigenous communities are seeking to develop economic opportunities for themselves, while still balancing that against the concerns to preserve the environmental integrity of the province. I think they're often worried about perhaps the Greens being able to turn that into an issue to organize opposition around. But as far as the BC United or the BC Conservatives are concerned, it's not really an issue that either of those parties can turn into an effective weapon against the NDP. So I think it's one that the NDP continues to manage, but perhaps doesn't have a fire lit under them to act on, and that's why we see this very slow, deliberate process.
Okay, Stuart Prest, my guest, political science lecturer at UBC, and we're taking your calls, asking you what issues you would like MLAs to focus on in the legislature this fall. Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and pound 690 on your cell phone. Also asking you what impact you think the BC Conservatives, now that they have official party status, what impact you think they may have in a debate in the legislature. And Liz is on the line in Victoria. Hi, Liz. Good afternoon. Thanks for calling in.
Hi, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm excited to see what it looks like when we have more articulation in the legislature of what policies are on the right, more conservative. And I think this would be a really excellent opportunity for the NDP to be a lot bolder with showing us what it looks like to be on the left and be progressive. Because they have a majority, they have the ability to make changes that they want to make. And I just haven't seen enough progressive policies from them. So I am a bit concerned if they aren't able to show us that our lives can be better when we have social services that are well funded and we take care of each other. I am concerned that that's going to leave an opening for the right-wing parties to suggest that they have solutions that will make people's lives better. And honestly, as a social worker, I don't think the evidence supports that. So things like climate change, things like poverty. The NDP, despite claiming to be progressive, they're still systematically providing like hundreds of thousands of people on income assistance and disability with only $500 a month to pay their rent. And I think anyone listening anywhere in BC knows that that is going to keep people in pretty extreme poverty. So I would love to see this opportunity for the NDP to really articulate what it means to be progressive.
Okay. And so, Liz, it sounds like you would like clarification on policies from each of the parties. It sounds, though, like you're not so happy with the NDP at this point, but that you don't see an alternative.
Exactly. Well, I know that there are a lot of folks on the right who are claiming to have solutions that will make people's lives more affordable and better, but the evidence does not support that. The evidence supports policies that are progressive, helping people's lives improve. And I know that as a social worker. And I would like to see that happen. Like, there is no reason why the NDP couldn't tomorrow say that we have free transit in the province of British Columbia. That would help address the root causes of climate change, and it would help address inequality. It would help people be more resilient in heat emergencies and get to cooler spaces. These are the kind of bold progressive changes that I expect when a progressive party has full power in my province.
Thank you very much for the call.
Thank you.
You take care, Liz. That's Liz joining
Thanks so
us
much.
from Victoria. As Stuart Prest, what she's saying there is an opportunity. This perhaps will, the public will see clarification from each of the parties as to what they stand for, but that she sees this as a challenge, perhaps, to parties that consider themselves progressive to push those policies, those agendas even further.
It's always a balancing act for a party that is in power. They have the opportunity, if they really see an issue as being important, when they have a comfortable majority, as the NDP has here, to really push the envelope and to introduce sweeping changes. But parties also have the eye on what you could call the median voter, that more center of the road voter who may be worried about those programs costing too much in the NDP's case. And so we have seen this consistently from this BC NDP government under David Eby and under Mr. Horgan as well before him, which is a progressive party that favored in many ways an incremental approach to change, trying to find ways to move in the direction, say, of expanding transit access, move in the direction of trying to find ways to bend the cost curve on housing, but not doing so much so quickly that it threatens to undermine those who are a little more comfortable with the status quo and alienate some of those more centrist voters. So it's always a balancing act, and it leads to voters such as Liz who are looking for more aggressive change to feel disappointed by the result.
Thanks again for your call, Liz, from Victoria. And my guest is Stuart Prest, who's a political science lecturer at UBC. And we're going to switch now to federal politics because news has been made there over these past few weeks, of course, Stuart. And in Ottawa this morning, the Prime Minister appealed for constructive dialogue. Now, this is top of mind for Canadians as the ongoing rift between Canada and India continues. The Financial Times reporting today that India has told Canada to withdraw 41 diplomats. And this comes, of course, after the Prime Minister stood in the House of Commons and alleged that there's credible information that India was involved in the killing of Sikh independence activist Mr. Nijjar. What do you make of this latest development?
Well, it shows that we are perhaps near the beginning of this saga, and then the end, where the government in India seems quite comfortable escalating things even further, applying additional pressure to Canada. And I suspect it's because it sees perhaps an international advantage in trying to put Canada on the defensive and to create additional space for it to maneuver. But I think these issues also are playing relatively well domestically. There is a lot of support in India for taking a hard line against what is perceived to be their Khalistani extremism, and there's a perception that Canada is a place where extreme views are being expressed. Canada, for its part, and Prime Minister Trudeau has little choice but to stand up for Canadians' rights to free expression and to protect the security of individual Canadians when they are threatened, as was pretty clearly the case here, at least allegedly with evidence through intelligence sources. And so that's a little bit reminiscent of the situation Canada faced up against China a few years ago, where Canada couldn't necessarily back down easily, but was not able to find a way to resolve this issue either, facing a fairly implacable opponent.
We're going to hear actually what impact this is having on businesses in BC. But first, let's hear what the Prime Minister did have to say this morning. And he appealed for constructive dialogue with India.
Obviously, we're going through an extremely challenging time with India right now, but that's why it's so important for us to have diplomats on the ground working with the Indian government there to support Canadians and Canadian families. We're taking this extremely seriously, but we're going to continue to engage responsibly and constructively with the government of India.
Will we retaliate, and can you confirm that they have asked us to take out 40 diplomats?
We're not looking to escalate, as I've said. We are going to be doing the work that matters in continuing to have constructive relations with India through this extremely difficult time.
That's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau speaking this morning, and we'll hear from Stuart Prest, my guest from UBC, in just a moment. But first, for reaction to this now from the business community, I'm joined by Anita Huberman, CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade. Anita, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon.
Well, what's your reaction to this latest demand and the latest iteration or step in this tension between the two countries?
It's certainly disappointing. I went to New Delhi at the end of August for the business portion of the G20 summit, and all signals were really approaching perhaps some kind of a Canada-India free trade agreement negotiation conclusion. 10 out of 13 negotiations had taken place up to that point. And we were hopeful that by the end of the year, we could have at least reached an almost conclusion to that free trade agreement that we've been advocating for years. But this has escalated. We knew that things were going to get worse before they got better. And this really is impacting businesses on the ground, not only within Surrey, but within British Columbia and Canada in general.
What are some of the tangible impacts that businesses are seeing?
Well, the tangible impacts is can they do business in India? So 30% of Surrey's population is of South Asian origin, significant cultural and economic ties. And we know that certainly visas are not being issued. In order to engage in global trade, you need to be on the ground in order to do that negotiation, to continue with your business in that country that you're going to be doing business with. And India is no different. So businesses are feeling that their trade with India is stalled. The future remains uncertain. And there is great concern as well because of significant family ties that our community has to India and visits that have been scheduled or are to be scheduled.
And so, we heard from Stuart Prest earlier saying that Canada had been pursuing more trade with India as a way of diversifying away from China. Where does this leave BC businesses then?
Well, number one is we should not say that we're going to give up on India. We urge both the government in India and the government of Canada to try to find a way to dialogue about this situation. It is their business communities that are at risk. But yes, we do need to, and we've been saying this for some time, that we do need to diversify our trade activity, not only from the United States or China, but also ensuring that we're looking at Southeast Asia, Europe, Australia, New Zealand. There are significant free trade agreements that Canada has negotiated already that we could take advantage of. For example, we just hosted a delegation from Mexico here in Surrey. So significant global opportunities, but India is not a country to ignore. And nor should we from an economic perspective. 1.4 billion people in India. And it is a country that we still will need to do business with into the future. We hope both countries, both of our governments recognize that.
Anita Huberman, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Anita Huberman is the CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade. And a final thought, take care. Stuart Prest, a final thought from you on what the federal government, what the Prime Minister needs to do now.
Well, I think he is in a hard position at the moment. The initial hope was pretty clearly that Canada would be joined by its other traditional allies like the United States and the UK in condemning the alleged killing and India's involvement in it. But without that kind of support, Canada's on an island, and so now we do see clearly the Prime Minister trying to de-escalate the situation, even as India is continuing to escalate. And so I think this will require some kind of diplomatic solution to try to resume ties between the two countries. But it is an ongoing thing that Canadians and Canada and other states are going to have to be aware of as well, that India as a country is powerful. It is a desirable trading partner, but it is also one that is willing to use a variety of diplomatic means and seemingly other means to try to pursue its interests. And so we have to be aware of that and careful of that going forward in all our dealings with the country. It's a different world than it was a decade or two ago, and Canada is repeatedly running up against these powerful and perhaps hard-edged opponents and rivals in the international environment. So it's something to be aware of for sure.
A lot of news to talk about today, Stuart. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Stuart Prest, lecturer in political science at UBC. And as I mentioned, a lot of news today in Ottawa. The House of Commons has chosen a new speaker.
Honourable Member for the All-Elmer, Greg Fergus.
Liberal MP Greg Fergus was elected by MPs this morning. He's the first Black Speaker of the House of Commons. In his pitch for the job, he promised to improve the decorum in the chamber, something past speakers have also pledged, but with little success. His first challenge will be to help Parliament move on from the embarrassing and painful incident, as it was called, that saw a Nazi-allied war veteran receive a standing ovation during President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit. It is 12:35, 1:35 in the Mountain Time Zone. Thanks so much for joining us. You're with BC Today here on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming too. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thanks very much for being with us this hour. And coming up, we will talk about ghosting. The not calling, not texting kind, not the Halloween costume kind. Don't worry, it's still just early October. We're not getting ahead of ourselves here right now, though. Here's Rob Zimmerman with the CBC News.
Good afternoon. The provincial government says BC Ferries will be issued penalties when it cancels ferries due to crew shortages. The province says details of how penalties will be applied will be confirmed in the spring. Minister Rob Fleming says while BC Ferries is working hard to secure additional staffing, the provision for penalties is an added measure to hold the company to account. The provincial government has launched a brief 2-month fall session by introducing new disaster management legislation. Emergency Management Minister Beau Ma says the bill follows international best practices. And the BC Wildfire Service, meanwhile, says there are still more than 330 fires burning in the province. About a third are in the Prince George Fire Centre, which is at drought level 5 in many areas. There are now just 3 fires of note, and only 66 are considered out of control. And now the forecast on the north coast. Rain this afternoon with a high of 11. Highs reaching 12 with strong winds and some sunshine in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, periods of rain with a high of 10. Sunny in the Kootenays this afternoon with highs from 15 to 19. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a high of 18 with sunshine. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, a mix of sun and cloud this afternoon, with highs around 15 degrees. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Michelle with BC Today.
Thank you, Rob, for that news update. I actually have some bit of news for you, too.
Great.
So, did you know that the National Pumpkin Weigh-Off in the U.S., yes, the Pumpkin Weigh-Off, I'll say that again.
Sure.
It was recently won by a man from Richmond, BC.
Wow, that is super exciting, right?
It was. Take a listen to this.
I was the biggest, and 58 other pumpkin growers tried, but they didn't succeed.
58. So beat out 58 others. The pumpkin is named Mama, as in the mother of all pumpkins, I guess, weighs more than 2,200 pounds. And Dave Chan has been growing pumpkins for 15 years.
Can you do anything with that? What do you do with it? Can you make it into like pie, or
like
can you make it a jack-o'-lantern, or what do you do with it?
Oh my gosh, they should make a jack-o'-lantern out of it. Apparently, the seeds are distributed among farmers, and the pumpkin itself, the meat or the filling, is given to farmers as well, because apparently pigs like them.
Oh, nice.
So
okay,
there you
so
go.
It goes to use. Very good.
But that's a huge pumpkin.
Congratulations. This was my effort. I've got it here. That was my effort in the gigantic.
That is very tiny. That is baby, I would call. Infant.
That's not
pumpkin.
Not a farmer.
Not Mama.
Clearly.
Neither am I. You've got me beat. I don't have anything. So there you go. Rob, thanks so much.
Sure.
Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. That is, I would say, a laudable attempt at growing a pumpkin. I would say it looked very nice. So there you go, Rob. Welcome back. This is BC Today here on CBC Radio 1. We're live streaming too on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thanks so much for being with us. And yes, so it's just the start of October, so probably too early to talk more about pumpkins and jack-o'-lanterns and Halloween ghosts, but we are going to talk about ghosting, actually being ghosted, which is even scarier, I think. It's, of course, when someone cuts off all communication, no texts, no calls, no visits in real life. So we want to know if you have been ghosted yourself. Now, a recent poll this past summer by Research Co. found that more than half of Canadians have been ghosted. And 81% of people from 18 to 34 years old said that it happened to them. And most of the ghosting was related to a friend or someone they dated or a relative. And this was an online panel study by Research Co. And so for comparison only, a randomized sample of the same size would have a margin of error of plus or minus 3.1%. So we want to hear from you. Have you ever been ghosted? Or have you been the ghoster? You can let us know. How did you deal with it? What's your advice for someone who has been ghosted? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Star or pound 690 on your cell phone. Pardon me, pound 690 on your cell phone. And you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. And joining me here in studio is Mario Canseco, president of ResearchGo. Hello.
Hello, Michelle. Great to be here with you.
Well, I'm very glad you showed up. I was fingers crossed.
You thought I was going to ghost you? No, I wore my lightest sweater, so it would be a little bit more of a Halloween type. But
That's
no,
right.
of course, you have to keep those situations.
Yes, exactly. Okay, thank you. Thank you for being here. Online, too, joining us by Zoom is Yuthka Girmay, Associate Professor of Psychology at Simon Fraser University. Hi there, Professor Girmay.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you for having me.
Oh, great to speak with you. I have to ask you both, have you ever been ghosted yourselves?
It has happened to me, yes.
Okay, you said that so somewhat forlornly. Yeah, it's happened.
Well, what is interesting about the way it's happening in our generation, and I'm talking about Generation X, it's usually related to job opportunities. It's related to a situation where you're talking to somebody about a specific plan down the road. And what we see with the younger generation, with the 18 to 34-year-olds, it's usually human behavior. You know, maybe I want to date this person. And you know, so I'm happy that the ghosting has happened in employment opportunities and not on something that is more closer to the heart.
That would perhaps, hurt the feelings a little bit. What about you, Professor Girmay?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely happened to me in a wide range of, situations. But, hopefully people listening in get a little comfort from that. Obviously, the poll is showing that a lot of people have experienced this behavior.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I have to say, Mario, I've talked to you many times. I don't think I ever recall talking to you about ghosting.
No.
Politics, maybe. But, what made you want to look into this in the first place?
Well, we were conducting some surveys for the BC Chamber. And what was interesting looking into the way we were establishing a way to look into the relationship between the job seeker and the job offerer. And part of what we saw in the results is, you get the interview, you talk to people, they tell you that you're one of the final 5 candidates, and then you never hear back from people. And it happened the other way as well. We had employers who were saying, I sent this person a job offer, and she or he never got back to me. So we thought, okay, if this is happening in this level, let's see what is happening at other levels of life. And this is why we thought it was a good opportunity. Yeah. It started as an employment study.
Right.
It became more of a human behavior study.
Right. And you would think that in the employment setting, things are more formalized. A certain kind of behavior is more, to be expected and standards to be upheld, but that still happens. And so, Yuthika, is ghosting happening more frequently, or are we just, have we just put a word to it now?
I think it is. My personal opinion is I think it is happening more frequently. And I think that part of that could be because a lot of our relationships, whether that be at work or in our family and, personal life, is happening online. It gives people an opportunity to kind of make ghosting easier. Whereas if you think about it, when people would go for job interviews back in the day or go for a date with someone back in the day, it would be people within your own community. It would be really difficult to try and ignore them in real life. That would actually make things worse. It would make things more
That would
awkward.
make the next run-in very awkward, I would say, at the grocery store.
Yeah, exactly. But because a lot of our interactions now are happening online, maybe it just feels like it's no big deal to ghost someone. And it's easy to, you don't have to even worry about what would happen if you see them next.
Right. And so did you find, I know you were speaking with the BC Chamber on this, Chamber of Commerce, are there consequences to ghosting in the professional world?
Well, what it does is it makes people more uneasy when they're having those opportunities because everybody feels left out. You're not telling me why I didn't qualify for this job. There's also that complexity that we heard particularly from the employers themselves. I can't talk to everybody, but there are certain levels. I know you get 75 resumes for a job, but if you brought in somebody, you met them, you shook their hands, you told them, I'll get back to you in a couple of weeks, and then you disappear. That's an issue, and that could have an effect on the way you're looking at specific jobs.
I wonder if, HR companies and consultants are looking into this at all.
I think it's important for them to do it because, part of what is happening is technology, right? We go back, let's say for the sake of argument, 1980s, 1990s, you're dating somebody, you call them and tell them I'm not home. You can't do that with iPhones now.
No,
You know, everybody knows that you got the message, we're connected, and people are expecting, especially younger Canadians, are expecting that situation where they reply immediately.
There's
You don't get it, and it's like, what's going on? Did something happen to the phone? No, you're just being ghosted.
Seeing the ... is very anxiety-inducing on your phone. And so youth guys, is this a sense of perhaps, this is more acceptable now, and as you've been saying, because of technology, should we adapt to it? Or, should people be trying to perhaps, roll things back and be accountable or be more honest with how they feel about this relationship?
I think so. I think it would be really easy to say that, oh, people who ghost someone are being mean or being malicious. But the fact that this is happening to so many people suggests, and actually research would support this, that often when people do engage in ghosting behavior, they're doing it without any, bad intent. They just are trying to, a lot of the times, try not to create an awkward situation or hurt the person on the other side by sort of explicitly saying, hey, you didn't get the job, sorry, or I don't want to date you, sorry. So I think, though, there is also so much research suggesting that ghosting behavior is really detrimental to people's psychological well-being. And so I think the next time people are in that sort of situation, they may want to just sort of pause and think about how they would like to be treated in that situation. And, hearing some resolution is sort of better than not hearing anything at all.
Yeah. Well, and as in your research, you do focus on psychological well-being, on intimate relationships, and on singlehood. So I imagine that's something that you've thought about a lot. I'd love to ask you more about that. I'm going to put the phone numbers out once again, asking you if you've ever been ghosted, or have you been the one to ghost someone, whether it was in a job setting, in a work setting, or perhaps in your social life, someone you've dated, or a friend, or a relative. Love to hear from you. And how did you handle that? If you were the one who was ghosted, how did you recover? What was the impact on you? What advice would you have for someone who's been ghosted? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And by email, we're bctoday@cbc.ca. And Joseph writes us, I've never been ghosted more than I have here in Vancouver. Oh dear, I feel like I've heard this before.
No.
This is going to be a fun one.
I've lived in several cities around the world, and dating is horrible here. There's a general lack of emotional intelligence here, and it makes for a terrible dating experience. I've since given up here, and now I'm seeing someone in the UK, and I plan on moving as soon as possible to be with her. It's a shame people here can't communicate like adults and resort to childish behavior. Oh dear, I'm sorry about that, Joseph. On behalf of Vancouver, and but I'm glad to hear that you've met someone, and that you are planning to move to be with your new partner. Thanks so much for your email. I mean, this goes to that lack of emotional intelligence stands out to me, because it's people not being aware, as you were talking about, Professor Guilherme, not being aware of the impact on others when someone does that. I mean, what do you take from that email?
Well, every 5 or 6 years, Vancouver Magazine will focus on how horrendous it is to date in a city like ours.
Yeah.
So this isn't surprising. But what is interesting is how it has been changing. It was ultimately about, if we go back 10, 15 years ago, it was more about the money and how expensive everything was. Now it's more about how difficult it is to communicate. And this really speaks about the loneliness that we might be feeling. There's lots of studies out there related to how much you talk to people who are next to you. Do you talk to your neighbors? Are you engaged in specific activities? And it's difficult to do that when you're a newcomer to a city like ours.
Sure, yes. And Professor Guilherme, what do you take from that? Really, the term emotional intelligence stood out for me. Does it for you?
Yeah, I think we want to be careful to just sort of say that anyone who's ever ghosted someone is not an emotionally intelligent person. I think the broader issue here is that we have not really evolved to have social relationships via technology.
Right.
You know, trying to understand how our brains work. Our brains work when someone is in front of us, when we're having, you know, meaningful conversations with the person sitting next to us or in the same room as us. So I think that with technology, it's kind of making it difficult for us to even get those kinds of emotional cues from other people that can help us sort of collaborate better in work situations and calibrate our behavior in dating contexts too.
That's really interesting. So in a sense, we haven't adapted to the style of communication via technology. I loathe to think what AI will do.
I know. Yeah, I mean, hopefully they ghost us and
Yeah.
you don't have to worry about that.
We wouldn't mind that so much.
No.
All right, let's take a call now. My guests are SFU professor Yuthika Guilherme and Mario Canseco, president of Research Co. And we are asking you, have you ever been ghosted? What impact did that have on you? How did you manage? How did you deal with it or recover? And if you have been someone who's ghosted someone else, tell us about that experience too. You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And Lynn is joining us from Vancouver. Hi, Lynn.
Hi there.
Glad to have you. What did you want to say about ghosting?
This is such a great discussion and something that's been very much on my mind. I think we've all been ghosted to some degree, but I feel like for me, when I do it, it's almost more of like a dropping of threads. We are so busy. We're all so inundated with texts, emails, calls. Like there's just so much going on. And I know, especially since the pandemic, just people have been so overwhelmed. And I mean, myself personally, I have been out, the last 18 months dealing with cancer treatment, and I feel terrible, but like there are just threads that get dropped. And I do my best to go back and pick them up or at least apologize and not completely vanish. But I think, in some cases, ghosting, for me, it's just been, I can't keep everything flowing all the time.
Yeah.
So, and I think you mentioned like we haven't adapted to all this technology. I think like expectations have also not adapted in a big way. It's hard. It's really difficult.
What a great point you make, Lynn, that it can be overwhelming and, you just, it's trying to cope with all the expectations of you. And as you were saying, on the one hand, it's not being able to adapt, not having adapted yet to being able to communicate, but also not adapting it to what the expectations should be. And in terms of those friends, I imagine that's helped, unload some of the weight on you.
Yeah. And I can't count how many apologetic emails and texts I've sent over the past, year. And it's just, I think we're all just overwhelmed. And when it comes to sink or swim, you kind of have to prioritize, and it sucks. But I think we're more connected than we've ever been in like human history. Yeah. And it's too much. I don't go on Facebook anymore because I love my friends from high school, but I can't. I just don't have the bandwidth for so many relationships. So,
That is perfectly understandable, especially with given what you've been through, Lynn. All the best to you in your treatment, okay? I wish you I wish you well.
Cheers.
Lynn, thank you for the call. I appreciate that very much. Your thoughts on that. What a great point. The bandwidth that is demanded of us these days, too.
Well, it reminded me of an experience I had when I came as a student from Mexico. And everything's new, right? So you're talking to your friends in Mexico who are working, who are doing things. And I would send in an email every night, like, Canada's not that cold. The weather is nice. It's raining a lot. Here's my school. Here's this. And they wouldn't reply for a week or two. Then I thought, these guys are ghosting me. Even before I knew ghosting existed, it's like, no, we're busy. We're doing other stuff. It can't all just be about your experience in Canada. Point taken.
And Professor Guilherme, yes, I mean, she brought up some really, really important points there.
Yeah, we're dealing with this odd scenario where we are the most connected that we could possibly be with people around the world. Yeah. But at the same time, we also have lives in real life as well as our online life. And it's really hard to manage all of that. It's not to excuse ghosting, but I think, if people do get ghosted, it may be something just to think about and reflect on and not take it personally, and just maybe consider that this person might also just have a lot going on their end.
Right. And I'll note that Lynn said that she had actually sent a whole bunch of apologetic emails too. So she did try and amend things. Graham is calling us from Gibson's. Hi, Graham.
Hi.
Hi. Have you been ghosted?
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
So I had a relationship with a person. We were good buddies, and we went swimming together. We, played music and whatnot. And I realized that I was always the person contacting him.
Ah.
And so at one point, I just thought, well, I wonder what would happen if I just stopped phoning. And so I did, and I never got a call back. So I don't know if I was ghosting or being ghosted.
Right. Yes. And you just said, well, this seems to be, you're sort of reading the room, right?
Yeah.
What a great question, Graham. And how are you doing now then? Just as a...
Oh, this was like 40 years ago.
Okay. See, it existed before. Graham, thank you for the question. What do you make of that? I've heard that happen too, right? So was Graham the ghoster or the ghostee? Professor Guilherme?
I'm not sure. I wouldn't say that Graham was the ghoster in that situation. I think what Graham was trying to do is test out how reciprocal that relationship was with their friend. And clearly it wasn't. Graham was the one putting in all the effort, and that can be, I can understand why that can be really, it doesn't feel nice. You want to make sure that our friendship relationships and our romantic relationships are reciprocal, they're equal, there's respect on both ends, and the other person wants to see you as much as you want to see them.
I just have about 45 seconds left. Just a bit of advice for how to deal if you've been ghosted, Professor Guilherme?
I think it's important for people just to not take it too personally. Think about other reasons this person might not have reached out to you. Yeah.
And Mario?
Understand the generational nuances. Everybody over 55 is going, tell me what I need to hear. Everybody under 35 is like, maybe not. And these are the two generations that need to talk to each other more, so it's complicated.
The nuances of social interaction. Thank you so much for taking us through this afternoon. What an interesting topic and discussion. Thanks so much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really good to have you both. Mario Canseco, president of Research Co., and Yuthika Guilherme is associate professor of psychology at SFU. That's it for our show today. You can listen again on the CBC Listen app and watch us on demand on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. And on our live stream, we're showing you right now a time lapse of Vancouver. Look at this, starting at 5 o'clock this morning as the clouds rolled in over the Burrard Inlet. We will leave you with that shot today. Thanks so much to everyone who joined us. I'm Michelle Eliot. Have a great afternoon. We'll talk to you tomorrow.